Hello folks, welcome to another week of Learning Linux. My name is Manny Correa. This week we're going to be learning about DNS, Domain Name System, and briefly what it is. I'm going to explain more about what it is, how it works, the big picture in my Monday night video. Today I'm going to go over some basics on installation, configuration, where the files are, all that fun stuff. So let's begin. First thing we want to do is what is DNS? So DNS is a service that runs in a server that does name translations. We talk about names because people search websites by name. The URL, a uniform resource locator, is in your browser window in the address bar. That's what we call a fully qualified domain name. So you own a domain name, like we're going to use manny.com as my domain name, and so that's up here in the address bar. So you call it a hyperlink, but we'll go over this more in my Monday night video. But right here is what we're talking about. Computers don't think in names, they think in IP addresses. We've gone over that last week about all the IP addresses and how it works. So DNS, your system is set up to go and look for a resolver DNS, which means it resolves your name to an IP address and sends back an IP address to your computer or your network interface card. Your network interface card then would be able to send to the IP address of the server you're looking for. So the main thing is there's an authoritative DNS server for your domain. That will be where your information is stored. There is both what we call forward lookup and reverse lookup. Forward lookup is name to IP. Reverse lookup is IP to name. So if I have a name and I want to find out what the IP address is, I have to look up in the authoritative DNS server in the forward lookup zone file for that IP address. Usually the authoritative is who you buy it from, so your ISP, or you could go outside and get it by like GoDaddy.com or something like that. So depending on who is your authoritative DNS server, you can set up your own, and that's what we're going to learn about today. How do you set up your DNS server? I'll get more into root servers and all that other fun stuff about how DNS works in my other video. So we need a program to set up and configure. The default one that we're going to use is called Bind, or Berkeley Internet Naming Daemon, I believe, or Domain. It's in the same as the ISC. I'll show you this. ISC.org, just like when we did the DHCP server, they do the same thing. So Bind 9 is the current version that we're using. So that's the project that manages Bind, is the ISC.org, or Internet Systems Consortium. And if you want to learn more information, there's a lot of documentation. They're talking about all the versions, everything's in there. So how do we install? Sudo apt install bind 9, and it's pretty much as easy as that once you put your password in. It's not very large. It's a very small service that runs, or daemon that runs. The daemon is typically called NAMED, or named daemon. You'll see some things named like named.service, but for the most part we will be using Bind 9 as our service. So either one will work. It's like an alias, Bind 9, so that's the name of the software, but the daemon is actually NAMED. So we can check to see if it's running. Do the sudo status, and let's see if Bind 9 works. Actually, system ctl status bind 9, and it's running. Let's see if named 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 works also, NAMED, which it should. So they both do the same or look at the same files, unit files, services to see if they run. So now that we have it installed, what do we have to configure? So we have to go to config files, and where are config files for most of our applications or most of our services that we've installed? They're in the etc folder. So we have to do the cd etc. I'm going to change my working directory, and I'm going to go to the bind directory. And if I do an ls in here, you'll see that there's a lot of config files in here. Some of the ones that you really have to worry about. So you have to worry about this guy right here, the named dot, and I'm going to bring him up. The named dot, let me see if I can view it in a different way. So we're going to clear this, and then I'm going to do an ls-l, and it should show up a little bit better. All right, there we go. So the named dot local, I'm going to show you this file, and this is where you put in the files that you want to use for your local DNS server. That's the main one we're going to worry about today. You'll see a few others. There's db.0, db.127, db.255, db.empty, db.local. You're going to have one that's going to be db. And for me, it's going to be manicore.com, and that's going to be my domain name. All right, so that's going to be my forward lookup zone file, and that's the one we're going to worry about. So if I want to create a domain name and have this work, I need to create that file and then put the name of that file in this named.conf.local file. So we're going to do the name.conf.local. This is a config file that points to all of your zone files. So every time you create a zone file, you have to make sure that it's in here so it points to your local zone files. Right now we don't have any in here, but if I was going to configure it, I would put it right in here since we haven't created it yet, but we can do that a little later. Let me get out of here and let me go show you what a one of these zone files looks like. So we're going to go look at the db.local file. So let's look at db.local, and in here is a very minimal setup for a zone file, the local zone file. So we could copy this whole thing and then start with our own. So instead of doing localhost, we would do our domain name and stuff like that in there. So one of the things that we want to do is figure out, hey, what's a good example of a forward lookup zone file? Because you have some things in here that you got to worry about. Main thing is the serial number. And we're going to be setting up a primary DNS server. There's a secondary, or what they call a slave server also. I'll talk more about that in the other video, the Monday night video. So we have the file, we know where we're going to go, but let's go look at an example from the book. So the book is going to talk about records and the types of records that you want to put in there. So this is an example of a forward lookup for the IPv6. We're not going to worry about IPv6 numbers. You see these IP addresses, that's kind of out there for those. We're going to look at an IPv4 and make sure we have all the proper configs in there. So this is an example of an IPv4. See how it says db.turtle.mytrek.com? That's the zone file name that they're going to use. So ours can be db.mani.com or mani.com. Let's just do mani.com. So if I wanted to create a file, let's just copy db.local. Actually, let's look at db.empty. We can use this one to start with also. So db.empty is one that we can use. So we'll do cp and we'll do db db.empty. Actually, we're going to have to do sudo in front of this because we need the root privileges. So we're going to do db.empty, and we're going to call it db.manny.com. And so now we'll use this as my forward lookup zone file. So now, if I do an ls, there should be a manny.com, and there is. So if we edit that, so we're going to do sudo gedit db.manny.com. And so we can go in and edit this guy. So some of the things, like use the book if you need to, use the internet if you need to figure some of this stuff out. But what I wanted to show you is that there's not only one source to get all the information you need. So some of the things we have to worry about. Do you want a time to live? And this is how many seconds that a record for the general, this whole zone file will live. And what is time to live? When somebody does a lookup or resolves your name to IP address, every DNS server that has been in the track of you looking up that name will store this record in its cache for DNS, a DNS cache, and also the server that looked it up, the original server or the original client. That means that your PC stores DNS lookups that you do or resolves. So when I go in and do google.com, my PC will store the IP address that has been recorded or looked up for google.com, and it stores that IP address. So the next time I go for it, go to that web page, I don't have to do a lookup for it. I already know it until my TTL ends. So if that TTL is, let's say, 3 days, then after 3 days, I'll do another lookup if I go to that. And then it stores it for 3 days, and so on and so on. Excuse me. Excuse me. This is for every single thing you do on the internet for names. So we're going to put a description in here, and typically some of them are in here. Let's say, do not edit this file because it is, but this is what we're doing. Instead, copy it and edit and use that copy, which we just did. So we're going to take this off, and we're going to do, this is saying this is the authoritative forward lookup for manny.com. We don't need this either. And we can have the TTL here, so 8600 is in seconds. We'll keep these defaults, so that's the retry expires. This is when it really expires, so you refresh it after 86,000 seconds, or you expire. Remember the cache is right here. Serial number. Serial number is important, and also the name of it. So in here, we have to put our name. So just like the book is talking about, you want to say, okay, in start of authority, this is my domain name, and then you do hostmaster. Whatever your domain name is, you say, I'm a hostmaster. So if I'm authoritative, I can do a hostmaster.turtle.mytrack.com, as long as we know what hostmaster is. So we'll just put in my domain and my domain right here. So right here, it's manny.com, and then this should be manny.com here. So I would put in the main server, so whatever name server this is, let's just call it ns1.manny.com. And I don't know if I have to have a period after that. I don't think I do. Oh, yes, it does. So see how it has a period? Make sure you have the syntax in here. The next thing is serial number. Serial number is very important. I don't usually like to start with just one. So what I will do is whenever I set up the domain name server, I start with that date, and then I put 3 digits on the right hand side. Or you could do 4 digits. So if we're doing, so what's today? 328. So let's do 328 2021, and then I'm going to put 1 2 3 1. So that is the serial number we're going to use. And what happens is, every time I make a change to the zone file, increment that by 1. And then what's going to happen is that's going to be used for these slave servers. And so if they recognize that, hey, this zone file is different than mine, the serial number, then I'm going to download the zone file and update my zone files automatically. And so the slave and the master talk to each other. So this is an example how things are installed or records are put in. There are different types of records. I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm just going to talk about the A record today. So what happens is, the first thing is the name, and then it's called an IN, and then the type of record it is, and then the IP address should be in there. You'll notice that there's a name on the other side on some of these. So like an alias record or a CNAME record is an alias that points to an A record. An MX record is the mail server record that points to another A record. So there are some records that point to other records. Well-known services are in there, WKSs. So if you have a server in there that you want anybody on your DNS to see, like an internal DNS, and I'll get into that in the other video also, different types of servers that are out there. So let me go back to here and saying we're going to put, let's just do www. So we're going to do a main web server, and it's going to be IN, and it's going to be an A record, and we're going to put an IP address in here. And we're going to do an internal guy. So we're going to do 10.10. Let's say he's on the 200 network, 200.21. So the IP address of my web server for Manny.com, so it would be www.manny.com, would be at 10.10.200.21. Let's just say I'm going to set up FTP01, and he's going to be an FTP site. And I'm going to do an A record, and we're going to do him on the same network, 10.10.200.25, and so on and so on and so on. As you get more and more in here, all of your A records will be in here. So your name server, so whatever IP address this is, you have to put an NS record in, and this says localhost, which is what he is. So the name server is a local host. Also, you can put in the name server and put the IP address of this server in also. So it would know, or people will know that use this DNS, what the name server is. But your name server should be put in your DHCP. So when you get an IP address, the option in there is one of your name servers. Your name server, this server, should be in there. So the IP address of this server should be in there. And then you can put NS01 or NS02. So if you have multiples, you usually always have a pair, if not more, of name servers. And I'll get into that in the other video why you do that also. Then we save this. And let's double check to make sure it is, did I look at it before? No, I didn't. All right, so we're going to have to do less db.manny.com. And they're in there. So that's the configuration that I set up. And you notice the domain is in there. You notice the IPs that I put in there, the website, and the FTP01. So if I put in now, if a client, so if one of the devices is using my server that I just set up here as its name server, it can get to ftp01.manny.com, and it would give it that IP address back. So as long as it's configured properly on the other side, then we'd do that. The first thing, though, this won't work until I restart the service. So how do I do that? Sudo restart. Sudo system ctl restart bind 9. And it restarted. Now that config file takes effect. There's actually a couple tools, but there's one way to check this. If you do the NS lookup, and this is a tool I'm going to go in more in depth into here. So now I'd have to put my server in, so whatever the name server is there. But if I did ftp01.manny.com, it would come back with, I either have that or I don't have that. So my name server is not set up in my machine anyways, so that is looking at my DNS from my ISP, which is Cox. It's not working, so I'd have to point this machine to my own self for name server in order to do that. Let's just see if I can do this. 127.0.0.1, and let's see if, I don't think this is going to work, but I can check it out. No, it didn't work. Let's do google.com. No, it doesn't like it. So if I change my server to 1.1.1.1 and then I do google.com, that should work. Alright, so that is working. But so NSLookup is a tool that we use to test that our name server is working, and we've done a configuration in there properly, and that's kind of the response that you should be getting. So you get that spitting back a google.com is coming back as an IPv4 and an IPv6 address. So if I didn't have another name server and I wanted to make sure that I could do that, I would be able to do that. I think there is one other thing that we have to worry about. Let's exit out of this. And then firewalls. So next we're going to talk about firewalls, but DNS uses port 53 or TCP port 53. What you have to do, so if I do sudo UFW, I think it's just UFW, no, status. Oh, it's inactive. I thought my firewall was on. But there are firewall rules that will block DNS from happening. So you have to make sure that your firewall rules are left open so you can actually get to the service that's on your machine. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth the next week. But anytime you add a service to your machine, you need to make sure your firewall rules are open. And that's pretty much all I have right now. I'll go more in depth in some of the more bigger picture stuff, but installation, config files, basic records that you want to set up in there. So in the other video, we're going to go more of what DNS is, how it works, and then get into more of the types of records that you would put in, and then master and slave setup. So that's going to be in the other video on Monday night. Thank you all, and have a good night or day.